The gown was mediocre at best. The King dynasty had never tolerated anything less than excellence. At the extravagant engagement celebration, the harsh words struck the future bride directly. The groom merely managed a forced grin, refusing to stand up for her, while spectators murmured, "A penniless woman reaching beyond her station, she'll soon be discarded." Everyone expected her to lower her gaze, embracing her outsider status. However, nobody realized that with just one touch of her device, the $950 million agreement the King clan boasted about could vanish immediately. Isabella Torres positioned herself in the ballroom's heart, her arms crossed gracefully before her modest cream-colored gown. The crystal lighting illuminated the basic silver clasp securing her ebony hair, and her makeup-free face appeared almost too gentle for the sparkling assembly. She wasn't their anticipated choice. Not suitable for Nathaniel King, heir to a property empire. Not appropriate for this chamber overflowing with riches and criticism. The celebration took place at the King family's manor, an expansive residence featuring marble surfaces and gold-accented barriers. Each attendee held significance: politicians, executives, established wealth with cutting remarks. Isabella remained unfazed as their gazes examined her. She simply remained there, gripping an untasted glass of sparkling wine. Her stance was upright yet relaxed, resembling someone trained to maintain composure through difficulties. Victoria King, Nathaniel's mother, glided toward her, her green dress shimmering like a peacock's plumage. At 55, her surgically altered face bore a smile that never touched her gaze. She halted before Isabella, speaking loudly enough for nearby attendees to overhear. "Darling, that outfit simply doesn't meet our expectations. Did you acquire it from a second-hand store?" Chuckles spread throughout the gathering. A well-dressed gentleman leaned toward his spouse, whispering, "She appears as though she wandered in from a transit station." Isabella's grip on her glass tightened marginally, yet her expression remained composed. She offered no reply. She had no need to. Her quiet response seemed to aggravate Victoria further, who addressed a nearby woman, stating, "Picture my son with someone so unremarkable." A woman in an elegant black gown, her pearls shining, approached Isabella with a condescending smile. She was a distant King relative, renowned for her sharp tongue at charitable events. "Oh dear, you must share where you purchase your clothing. I could use some amusement," she remarked, her tone dripping with artificial sweetness. The surrounding group snickered, their eyes gleaming with entertainment. Isabella placed her glass down, moving deliberately, and met the woman's gaze. Her voice was soft yet sharp as a concealed blade. "I purchase from places where people don't need to buy their self-assurance." The relative's smile stiffened, and several guests shifted uneasily, but the moment passed as another voice declared, "She has courage. I'll acknowledge that." The laughter continued, but Isabella's eyes held an unwavering flame that went unnoticed by the crowd. Nathaniel stood nearby, adjusting his shirt cuffs, his attractive face maintaining a rehearsed smile. At 29 and tall, he possessed the type of charm that made people overlook his arrogance. Yet he didn't advance, didn't utter a word in her defense. His eyes glanced at Isabella, then away as if embarrassed to be associated with her. The crowd observed. A woman wearing diamond earrings and a false laugh leaned in, her voice carrying, "She's obviously pursuing his wealth. What other reason would he have for choosing her?" Another guest, a balding man with a luxury watch, chuckled. "She lacks refinement. Nathan's settling for less." Isabella's lips separated as if she might respond, but she closed them again. She set her glass on a passing server's tray, her movement slow and intentional. Before proceeding further, if this narrative resonates with you, perhaps you've experienced that type of sting before, take out your phone quickly. Appreciate this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means much to share these experiences together, to navigate through pain and emerge stronger. All right, let's continue. The mockery persisted. Adrian Cole, the King family's attorney, approached next, his slick smile barely concealing his disdain. At 45, with a sharp jawline and a tendency to speak as if he controlled the room. Isabella, correct? If you genuinely cared for Nathan, you would have contributed something valuable. Perhaps a ring bearing the Torres name. Oh, wait. Likely worthless. The crowd laughed again, more loudly this time, and Isabella's eyes met his. Momentarily, the room seemed to hush. She tilted her head slightly, her voice gentle but clear. You appear quite certain of that. Adrian blinked, momentarily caught off guard, but recovered with a smirk. Oh dear, I recognize a fortune hunter when I encounter one. The statement lingered in the air, harsh and unpleasant, and the guests consumed their whispers eagerly, growing more audacious. A young man, barely past his 20s, with slicked hair and an expensive timepiece, decided to join the attack. He was Nathaniel's friend, always eager to establish his position among the elite. Hey, Isabella, do you even understand how to use proper dining utensils? He called out, raising his own fork as if it were a prize. The room erupted with laughter, and he grinned, enjoying the attention. Isabella turned slowly, her eyes focusing on his. She picked up a fork from the closest table, spun it once between her fingers, and set it down with a gentle clink. I understand enough to dine without creating a spectacle, she said, her voice so calm it seemed to drain his confidence. The laughter subsided, and he looked away, his cheeks reddened, but someone else quickly filled the silence with another insult. Across the room, a woman in a red dress, wearing excessive perfume, leaned toward her companion. Notice her footwear, worn. She doesn't belong in this place. Another voice, a man with a loud necktie and louder laughter, chimed in. Nathan's mother will remove her before the wedding. Isabella's hand touched the edge of her small purse, her fingers pausing there as if she was steadying herself. She didn't glance at Nathaniel, who was now conversing with a group of men, his back turned to her. The room felt more frigid, the atmosphere thick with judgment. Victoria circled back, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Dear, you must feel so displaced. Why don't you sit in the corner? Less conspicuous. Isabella's gaze lifted, steady and unwavering. I'm comfortable where I stand, she said, her voice low but firm. The room paused briefly before the laughter resumed. An elderly man, a retired banker with a protruding belly and a condescending smirk, decided to take his turn. He leaned against a column, swirling his whiskey glass. You know, girl, you're bold to stand there, but boldness doesn't purchase you a place at this table, he said, his voice loud enough to attract attention. You're beyond your depth. Isabella's fingers paused on her purse, and she turned to face him, her movement slow, almost calculated. She stepped closer, just enough to make him shift uncomfortably. Interesting, she said, her voice soft but cutting. I always believed depths were for people too frightened to play the actual game. The banker's smirk wavered, and several guests exchanged glances, uncertain her to laugh or remain silent. Victoria's eyes narrowed, sensing a change she disliked. The party continued, and the insults became more pointed. A young woman, perhaps one of Nathaniel's cousins, with glossy lips and a malicious smile, stepped close. You know, Isabella, you're bold to appear looking like that. Most women would have at least made an effort. Her friend giggled, and Isabella's fingers twitched as if she was about to reach for something but restrained herself. She looked at the woman, her eyes calm but piercing. Effort for what exactly? The question landed like a stone, and the woman faltered, her smile fading. Before she could recover, Victoria raised her glass, her voice cutting through the chatter. To my son's future and a bride who will understand her position. The toast drew cheers, but Isabella didn't move. She stood there, her face unreadable, as if waiting for something. A server, young and anxious, stumbled slightly as he passed Isabella, a tray of beverages wobbling in his grasp. A nearby woman, wrapped in furs despite the warm evening, laughed harshly. "Be careful, boy. Don't damage her dress. It's probably the finest thing she possesses." The crowd chuckled, and the server's face flushed as he mumbled an apology. Isabella reached out, stabilizing the tray with one hand, her touch gentle but steady. She looked at the woman, her voice barely audible. "It's not the garment that's important. It's the individual wearing it." The server gave her a thankful look before hurrying away, but the woman in furs simply scoffed, turning to her friends. "She has attitude, I'll grant her that." Isabella's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't respond further. Her eyes scanned the room as if memorizing each face. Years earlier, a small girl sat on a wooden floor, her tiny hands tracing the edges of a book. Her father, a man with gentle eyes and a firm voice, knelt beside her. "You don't need to raise your voice, Isabella," he said, his hand resting on her shoulder. "You don't need to prove anything. Simply exist." The memory flickered as Isabella's eyes caught a reflection from a passing vehicle outside the mansion's windows. It was the same type of car her father used to drive, a black sedan, understated but powerful. She blinked, and the memory vanished, replaced by the party's buzz and the weight of countless eyes. The King family wasn't finished. Adrian, emboldened by the crowd, leaned in again, his voice loud enough to carry. "You know, Nathan, she's attractive, but she's holding you back. No heritage, no connections." Nathaniel laughed nervously and rubbed the back of his neck. "Come on, Adrian. Give her some slack." But his words were weak, half-hearted, and the room recognized it. Isabella's jaw tightened briefly before she smoothed it out. She turned slightly, her eyes scanning the crowd as if counting every face, every voice. Then she spoke, her voice steady. "You discuss connections frequently. What's yours valued at?" The question hung there unanswered as Adrian's smirk disappeared. The crowd shifted uneasily, but no one ceased. They were too engrossed in their own entertainment. A woman with a designer handbag, her nails painted sharp red, decided to escalate matters. She was a socialite known for her social media posts and her talent for destroying people with a smile. "Isabella, honey, do you even hold employment? Or are you simply planning to survive off Nathan's inheritance?" The question drew gasps and giggles from the crowd, and Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. Isabella's hand rested on the edge of a table, her fingers tapping once, twice, like a metronome marking time. She looked at the woman, her voice steady. "I earn what I possess. Can you claim the same?" The socialite's smile tightened, and she tossed her hair, but the crowd's laughter was less certain. Now a few guests exchanging uneasy glances. Victoria took the stage next, her voice booming over the microphone. "Let's discuss the King family's future. We have just finalized a $950 million agreement with Torres Global Tech, managed by some enigmatic CEO who never reveals himself." She paused for applause, her eyes gleaming with pride. "That's the type of influence we contribute to this family. Not everyone can maintain the pace." The insult was obvious, and the guests laughed, their eyes darting to Isabella. She raised her eyebrows slightly and lifted her glass. "An agreement with whom?" she asked, her voice cutting through the noise. Adrian jumped in, eager to display his knowledge. "Torres Global Tech, the nation's largest technology conglomerate. You wouldn't be familiar with them." Isabella's lips curved into a faint smile, almost imperceptible. She took a sip of her champagne, and the crowd missed it entirely, too busy mocking the foolish bride. A man in a pinstriped suit, a hedge fund manager with a reputation for arrogance, decided to push further. He stepped close to Isabella, his voice loud and patronizing. "You know, I've encountered women like you before. They believe they can infiltrate our world, but they always fail spectacularly. He gestured to the room as if it were his domain. Isabella's eyes flicked to his, her expression unreadable. She reached into her clutch, pulling out a plain silver pen, and twirled it between her fingers. "Some of us don't need to infiltrate," she said, her voice low but steady. The man laughed, but it was forced, and a few guests nearby fell silent, watching her closely. The pen caught the light, and for a moment it seemed to carry more significance than the room itself. The evening progressed, and Isabella moved through the room like a shadow, her presence quiet but unshakable. A man in a velvet jacket bumped into her, spilling his drink. "Watch it, sweetheart," he snapped, brushing past her as if she were nothing. She stepped back, her movements graceful, and placed her clutch on a table. Her fingers lingered there, brushing the edge of a small card inside, a business card, plain white, with the Torres Global logo. She didn't pull it out, didn't need to, but her eyes flickered with something new, a spark of resolution. The room didn't notice. They were too busy laughing, too busy tearing her down, but Isabella was finished waiting. The wedding day arrived quickly. The King estate transformed into a display of wealth. White roses lined every pathway, and a massive tent housed 1,000 guests, all dressed to impress. Isabella stood at the altar, her dress simple but elegant, a soft ivory that embraced her figure without demanding attention. No veil, no jewelry, just herself. The priest began the ceremony, his voice steady, but Victoria stood up, her face a mask of outrage. "Before my son commits, tell us, how much wealth does your family actually possess?" The words echoed through the tent, and the guests erupted in laughter. A woman in a feathered hat leaned forward. "Yes, what's she contributing? Nothing." Another voice, sharp and cruel, added, "She's unsuitable for this household." A young woman, a fashion influencer with 1 million followers, pulled out her phone and photographed Isabella at the altar. "This is going viral," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. Caption: "When you arrive at a king wedding looking like a thrift store reject." The crowd around her laughed, and phones started clicking, capturing Isabella's every gesture. She stood still, her hands clasped, but her eyes found the influencers. "Ensure you capture my best angle," she said, her voice dry but steady. The influencer hesitated, her phone lowering slightly, but the laughter around her encouraged her to continue. Isabella's fingers brushed the edge of her dress, smoothing it once, a small gesture that seemed to anchor her against the storm. Nathaniel shifted on his feet, his eyes darting to his mother, then to Isabella. "Mother, perhaps you're correct," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The betrayal stung, visible in the way Isabella's fingers curled into her palms. Victoria pressed on, her voice loud and triumphant. "This marriage would be a disgrace to our reputation." The guests nodded, their whispers growing louder. "She's a nobody," one said. "Nathan deserves superior," another added. Isabella's eyes turned cold like steel under moonlight. She didn't flinch, didn't weep. She just stood there, her silence more powerful than their words. A man in a bow tie, a tech mogul who'd made his fortune in startups, leaned toward his wife, his voice carrying across the tent. "I wager she's never even entered a boardroom," he said, chuckling. "Probably thinks a merger is something you request at a restaurant." The laughter spread, and Isabella's hand paused mid-motion as if she'd been about to adjust her dress, but stopped. She turned her head slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "I recognize a poor deal when I see one," she said, her voice so quiet it barely reached him, but the words struck like a dart. The mogul's chuckle died in his throat, and he looked away, pretending to check his phone. The crowd didn't notice, too busy adding their own insults. Then she acted. She stepped forward, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, and took the microphone from the priest. Her voice was calm, deliberate, like she was delivering a judgment. "Thank you for revealing your true characters. This wedding concludes here." The tent exploded in gasps and murmurs. Nathaniel, his face turned red. "How dare you embarrass me before everyone?" he shouted, stepping toward her. Isabella didn't retreat. "I'm not fleeing," she said, her voice like ice. "I'm terminating it." The crowd laughed, thinking she had broken under pressure. "She's lost her mind," a man muttered. "Lost her golden opportunity now, pretending to have dignity," a woman sneered. Isabella didn't respond. She just turned, her movement slow and confident, and walked toward the edge of the altar. Victoria wasn't finished. She stepped forward, her voice dripping with poison. "No home, no fortune. You think abandoning us means anything?" Adrian, standing nearby, smirked. "Torres Global is connected to that $950 million deal with King Group. Without us, she has no future." Nathaniel joined in, his voice bitter. "Without me, you're worthless." The guests piled on, their voices a chorus of cruelty. "She's just a failure pretending to be proud," one said. Isabella's hands slipped into her clutch, her fingers brushing her phone. She didn't look at them. Didn't need to. Her face was calm, her eyes focused like she was seeing something they couldn't. A woman in a glittering gown, a real estate tycoon's wife, decided to add her voice. She stood up, her wine glass raised as if making a toast. "To the girl who thought she could participate in our world and failed," she said, her smile vicious. The crowd cheered, but Isabella's eyes flicked to her, and she tilted her head just slightly. "Some games aren't worth winning," she said, her voice so soft it was almost lost in the noise. The woman's glass trembled in her hand, and she sat down quickly, her face flushed. Isabella's fingers closed around her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen, a quiet promise in her steady grip. She pressed a button on her phone, and the giant screen behind the altar flickered to life. A statement appeared, bold and official. "Torres Global Tech terminates $950 million contract with King Group due to fraud and disrespect." The tent went silent. Adrian's face drained of color. Victoria's hand flew to her chest, her rings glinting as she trembled. Nathaniel collapsed into a chair, his mouth open. The crowd gasped, their whispers frantic. "What? She's Torres Global?" Isabella stepped forward, her voice even, unshaken. "I don't require this family. I am Isabella Torres, the CEO you mocked." The words landed like a hammer, and the room broke apart in chaos. Years ago, a teenage Isabella sat in a boardroom, her father at the head of the table. He handed her a pen, his voice steady. "This company is yours one day, Bella. But it's not about power. It's about truth." She nodded, her young face serious, clutching the pen like a promise. Now in the tent, her fingers brushed that same pen tucked into her clutch. She didn't pull it out. Didn't need to. The memory was enough. The King family unraveled. Victoria fell to her knees, her voice shaking. "Forgive us. It was a misunderstanding. Restore the contract." Adrian, sweating, stepped forward. "We can renegotiate. Just overlook our mistake." Nathaniel grabbed her hand, his voice desperate. "I'm sorry. I still love you." Even the guests flipped, their voices syrupy with fake admiration. "We've always admired you," one said. Isabella looked at them, her eyes distant, like she was seeing through them. She pulled her hand free from Nathaniel's grip, her movement slow and final. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her silence said everything. A man in the back, a minor investor in King Group, tried to salvage his dignity. He stood, his voice loud but shaky. You think you can just walk away and ruin us? You'll regret this. Isabella paused at the edge of the altar, her back to him. She turned her head just enough for him to see her profile. Regrets are for people who make bad choices, she said, her voice calm but final. The man sat down, his face pale as whispers of panic spread through the crowd. Phones buzzed with notifications, stock alerts, news updates, the King Empire crumbling in real time. Isabella didn't look back. She just kept walking, her steps steady, her clutch tucked under her arm. She stepped to the microphone again, her voice steady as stone. Torres Global will transfer the deal to your rival corporation. The words hit like a shockwave. Phones buzzed as news alerts flooded in. King Group stock was crashing. Guests scrambled to their feet, some slipping out the exits, their faces pale. No one wanted to be tied to a family that had just lost everything. Headlines were already spreading. Bride humiliated. CEO strikes back. King Empire collapses. Isabella stood still, her hands folded, watching the chaos unfold. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just waited, her presence filling the room. Nathaniel wasn't done. He staggered to his feet, his face twisted with rage. "No one will ever truly love you, only your money," he screamed. "You'll die alone with no family." The words cut through the noise, and for a moment, the tent went quiet. A few old rivals in the crowd nodded, their voices low. "That cold CEO will never know real happiness," one muttered. Isabella's fingers paused on her clutch, her eyes flickering with something raw, something human. She didn't respond. She just turned, her heels clicking as she walked toward the exit. A woman in a silver dress, a former friend of Victoria's, tried one last jab as Isabella passed. "You'll always be alone, no matter how much money you have," she said, her voice sharp with desperation. Isabella stopped just for a moment and looked at her. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small, worn photo, holding it up just long enough for the woman to see. A young Isabella with her father, smiling. "I'm never alone," she said, her voice soft but unshakable, before tucking the photo away and continuing her walk. The woman's face crumpled, and the crowd fell silent, the weight of Isabella's words settling over them like dust. Then a man stepped forward from the guest seats. He was tall, with dark hair and quiet confidence, his suit understated but sharp. The rival CEO, James Harper, head of Harper Dynamics. He took Isabella's hand, his voice low but clear. "We didn't just sign a deal. I want to build a real family with you." The tent erupted again, this time with gasps of shock and awe. Isabella's eyes softened just for a moment as she looked at him. She didn't speak, but her hand tightened in his. The crowd parted as they walked out together, the applause growing louder, a wave of respect and disbelief. Isabella stepped into a waiting limo, the door closing with a soft thud, leaving the King family behind in the ruins of their own making. The fallout was swift. Victoria's social circle dropped her, her invitations to galas vanishing overnight. Adrian was fired by his firm, his name tied to the failed deal. Nathaniel's face was plastered across tabloids, his reputation shredded. One guest, the woman in the red dress, lost her sponsorship with a luxury brand after her cruel comments went viral. The consequences weren't loud or dramatic. They were just real, like gravity pulling a stone to the ground. Isabella didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her silence now carried the weight of truth. Years ago, a young Isabella stood in her father's office, staring at a framed photo of them together. He'd hugged her then, his voice soft. "You're enough, Bella. Always." Now, as the limo pulled away, she glanced at James, his hand still in hers. The photo was long gone, but the feeling was there, steady and warm. She didn't need to say it. She just leaned back, her shoulders right, relaxing for the first time that day. The world kept turning. The King family faded, their name a cautionary tale. Isabella kept moving, her company stronger than ever, her life fuller than anyone could have guessed. She didn't need their approval. Never had. And for everyone who'd ever been looked down on, judged, or silenced, her story was a quiet promise. You're enough. You always were. The fight isn't loud. It's steady, and it's yours. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow. Thank you for watching.